All right, welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast. My name is Don 𝗙𝗵𝗀𝗃, and I lost my virginity at a Weird Al concert. Thank you. Later on, we're going to talk to a major player in the music industry who specializes in managing and preserving the artistic brand and integrity of some of rock's long-departed icons like Jim Morrison and The Doors, Janis Joplin, Otis Redding, Muddy Waters, and scores more. Founder of Jampol Artist Management, Jeff Jampol. Here on the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast, we not only spotlight the artists who create the music that changed our lives, but also the industry insiders who facilitate those artists in 100 different ways, from artist development to recording engineers, and one particular management area that our guest today has parlayed into one of the most successful businesses on the globe. And here to tell you all about his company, whose tagline is "We Manage Legends," please welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast, Grammy Award-winning President of Jampol Artist Management, Jeff Jampol. Good morning, Jeff.
Hey, Don. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing it. Well, tell us a little bit about what services Jampol Artist Management offers.
We specialize in managing large, iconic musical artists, many of whom are deceased. It's not a requirement. It tends to be mostly that. But it's basically when an artist is inactive, meaning when they stop writing new music and or touring. That can happen through death. It can happen through retirement. It could happen through they just stop. And once that happens, it becomes a whole new business. Most managers come up in this business knowing and being really good if they're successful at, we'll say 3.5 things, which is number one, touring, because that's where the majority of a current artist's income from which it will derive.
Right.
Tour merch, kind of obvious. Radio and or streaming song promotion. Right. And then the 0.5 is branding and co-branding deals. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a level of expertise in the current management field for that kind of work. I think they're learning, but I think a lot of them are pretty new to it. But concerning the major three, which is touring, tour merch, and song promotion, once an artist is inactive or stops touring, guess which 3 things we don't do anymore?
Right.
And so, again, it becomes a whole new business. And it's a business of album releases, song releases, re-releases, publishing, sync, film and TV licensing, commercial use, museum exhibits, book deals, retail apparel, which is a completely different business from tour merch.
Sure.
Tour merch is the souvenir business. Somebody's buying a memento of the evening they just experienced. The apparel business is when usually a 10 to 24-year-old female will walk into a retail store to buy a garment to wear. Right.
And that's a relatively new area. It's not something you would have seen, let's say, even 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think it really started to pick up in the 80s, started in the 80s and started to become prevalent in the 90s and aughts. And now it's a significant business, and it's in 64 territories around the world at 3 levels, what we call upstairs, mid-tier, downstairs, or high-end, mid-tier, low-end, or mass, as they call it. Mm-hmm. So it's really almost like 3-dimensional chess. And then, of course, you have museum exhibits, and you have books, and you have all kinds of other areas that most artists and most managers are not really experienced in.
Yep.
And, of course, all on a worldwide basis, and it's different from territory to territory.
Right. I read a quote of yours. You said, "A lot of damage can be done in the name of commerce, and applying business terms to art can often sully art's purity." And that's quite profound and quite true.
Well, I'll give you the foundational premises which guide me and, by extension, guide my company. The first thing is we're dealing with art here, and there's art and there's a message. And this is not a deodorant or a toothpaste.
Right.
This is an artist. And successful artists, all of them have magic. They have alchemy. And there's something that connected a 12-year-old to Jim Morrison in 1967 and 77 and 87 and 97. And as I tell my students, first week of class, if you think it's about the music, you're going to fail this class. Mm-hmm. Because if you think it's about the music, then by deductive logic and reasoning, you think the magic to James Dean is about his acting.
That's a good point.
He is an actor, and his acting may be really good, but that's not the magic. So the music is really an entry point to the magic. And I think it's one of the problems that current artists today are having, although hopefully we're coming into a different period. But we've become a singles culture all over again, and it's all about the song. And you have so few artists who have a unique character and identity, above and beyond the music. The prime example that comes to mind of someone who's done it well is Lady Gaga.
Right.
And if you become interested in that artist, and if you connect with that artist, then by natural extension, you're interested in everything Lady Gaga does, whether it be a book or a cooking show or a Broadway appearance or an album or a film. And as I used to tell current artists when I was managing current artists, I used to say, listen, dude, I don't manage songs. I manage artists. Be an artist. Have a point of view. Have an opinion.
Sure.
Stand for something.
And that can be packaged right into their whole being. They become the brand.
Well, exactly. They are. Right. And the music becomes an extension of that. And, music is what we use as the fuel, but it's not the car, not to descend into metaphor hell here.
Right.
So we recognize that there's magic here that we have to protect and we have to promote. It's kind of a heavy yoke to wear.
Sure.
And I've told my staff members on many occasions, it's like I'll poke my head in their office and say, listen, it's 11 a.m. And I'll bet you, if you had espresso this morning, I'll bet you by 6 p.m. you could completely ruin and tear asunder what took Janis Joplin 27 years and death to build. One day by 6 p.m. today. So have a careful day. But at the same time, you can't stand still. One of the analogies I always use for having a pop culture brand is, it's like walking up a down escalator. And if you're standing still, you're not standing still. You're moving backward. So you have to have enough forward momentum to overcome the downward trend of the escalator and not move so fast that you trip all over yourself and you end up at the bottom anyway.
One of the worst examples I can think of personally, I'm a big Beatles fan, and there was so much hoopla when Revolution appeared in a Nike ad.
That's a really, really interesting example. So let's talk about that for a minute. I think the biggest factor of that, on its surface was this absolute, pardon the phrase, revolutionary change in the use of their music. I mean, we were just not used to seeing that or hearing that in a commercial. We were not used to seeing that or hearing that co-opted, and it blew our collective minds.
Right.
And I think that was the majority of the shock. And sometimes that's just the shock of the new, and we get past it and we become accustomed to it. I mean, even down to the mundane, like I know friends who don't want to get rid of their iPhone 8s because they like the home button and they don't want to deal with a phone without a home button. It's just, we get demo love, for lack of a better phrase.
Right.
Once we get past that, you look at a band like the Beatles, who were always above the mundane. They were above, or at least seemingly above, just sheer commerce. Although, if you look at their merchandising programs, they had Beatle wigs. And if you look at the title of the song and what it stands for and what these guys are singing about, it's completely antithetical to that use.
Right.
And so, for me, I don't have the luxury of calling McCartney and going, what do you think?
Right.
One of the quicksand traps in my business, if you will, is you cannot say what an artist would think or an artist would do. You can only say what they thought and what they did. In the case of Jim Morrison, famously, perhaps, the Doors have never done a commercial. In 1967, Light My Fire was the #1 song in the world. And, the Doors had always, and still do, operate under a governance of unanimity, meaning they all have to agree.
Mm-hmm.
And General Motors came to the Doors and said, hey, we want to use Light My Fire to promote this new European car that Buick's doing called Opel. And the guys tried to find Jim, and Jim was off in Europe somewhere. And they tried to contact him and reach him, and they couldn't. And so they had to make a decision on their own. And I believe the number was $50,000 for that song. And Robbie had written the song.
Right.
And so they made the decision in Jim's absence to go ahead and approve it. And they got the check, and they cashed it. And General Motors shot the commercial. And I'm told it was actually aired 2 or 3 times. And when Jim got back from Europe, he lost his mind.
Rightfully so.
I don't think he ever fully trusted the band members after that. They had a warm camaraderie and working relationship, but I think there was always a little bit of gray area in there after that. But he called the lawyers, and the lawyers said, there's nothing we can do. We signed a deal. We cashed the check. They made the commercial. Jim got so incensed, he actually personally called the CEO of General Motors and got him on the phone. And he said, look, if you keep airing that commercial, I'm going to buy 10 Opels and I'm going to smash one with a sledgehammer on stage at every concert we play. And so they pulled the commercial.
That's great.
Conversely, if you look at Janis Joplin, She was sitting around her apartment in San Francisco one night with a bunch of friends. It was probably 67, 68, and she was drinking Southern Comfort, and one of them flippantly said to her, you drink so much of that stuff, they should sponsor you. And she was like, you know what, you're right. I drink it on stage, and they should sponsor me. And she wrote a letter to Brown & Forman, who was the spirits company that owns Southern Comfort, and she said, I'm Janis Joplin, I'm a famous singer, I drink your Southern Comfort on stage, and you should sponsor me. And the president of Brown & Forman wrote her back and said, really, what is it that you want? And she shared that letter with her friends, and she wrote back to him and said, I want a full-length white ermine coat and a matching ermine hat. And he sent it to her. And She wore it everywhere. And she said, this is the coat that Southern Comfort bought me. So clearly, Jim Morrison was not okay with doing commercials, right, and Janis Joplin was.
Interesting.
So going back to my earlier statement, you can't say what Jim would do. Do I think Jim would think differently today? There's a good chance he would.
Right.
But he's not here for me to ask him, so I can only go by what he did. So we have never done a commercial. With Janis, I know what she did. And so going by that, we use Joplin songs in commercials. We've licensed it to Mercedes-Benz. We've used it with Christian Dior. There was a very well-shot commercial with Natalie Portman using Janis Joplin music for a fragrance. And that's fine because that's authentic to who Janis was and what she thought.
Right.
Would we do a commercial for the Doors under the right circumstances? Maybe. If it was something, promoting access to entertainment or something that was free, certainly not a consumer product. Again, not a toothpaste or deodorant. Or we may never do one. That's really up to, the Morrison and Manzarek estates and John Densmore and Robbie Krieger.
But when you say commercial, you would do a Doors commercial to promote an upcoming release or something like that.
Well, I don't see that as a commercial.
Okay. I mean, actually using their songs in a commercial enterprise for a product other than something that they're making, right?
It depends. I mean, if there was an automobile company that was promoting a hydrogen vehicle, I think we'd consider it. There was somebody that was doing something, that promoted clean energy or, again, access to music or entertainment. Mm-hmm. I remember there was some talk in the Doors camp back when Microsoft launched their Bing search engine. A search engine is not a product. It's something that's free that people utilize, and it promotes access to all kinds of things. Would we consider that? We'd consider that. I'm not saying whether we would or wouldn't, but
you wouldn't shut
and
the
it
door
hasn't happened yet.
Right.
I'm not going to rule it out, but I'm going to say the odds are highly against.
It's funny you say Microsoft, too, because I remember when Windows 95 launched, the Stones,
Start Me Up.
And again, I got that same knee-jerk reaction where I felt, I don't know. It just seemed wrong. You're doing this for the artists, but also for their fan base, too. I would imagine that's a consideration as well.
Yes, but you can't talk about something as broad as, quote, a fan base, unquote. You really have to look at it demographically and generationally. So to you and I, we're old guys. We know what our status quo is and what we're comfortable with.
Right.
But what we're comfortable with versus what a 19-year-old is comfortable with are two completely different worlds.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
So to us, doing a commercial was anathema. It was selling out. It was,
right,
giving it up to the man.
Yeah.
It was anti-rock and roll. It was, all those things.
Yeah.
And if you look at the world today, and I'm not condoning either, I'm just being a messenger and I'm an observer, the tables have turned literally 180 degrees. And now there's a lot of big hits that are touting brands and up in the club with my Louis Vuitton. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just completely different. Right. And I think a lot of kids, a lot of these last 2 or 3 generations find their music through film, TV, and commercials. There's a huge clutter out there. How do you break through? It's funny to me. We got a note from Spotify. It was probably 6-7 months ago for the Doors, congratulating us that since the advent of Spotify, we had now reached 1 billion streams. And I was kind of patting myself on the back, and I thought, wow, that's pretty awesome for them. And then I went and I looked at the demographics, and Drake had had 1 billion streams in the last 4 weeks.
I couldn't name one of his songs, but I know what you're saying.
But again, you and I are not the target audience.
Right, exactly.
So, and if I don't turn 19-year-olds onto the idea of the Doors, then the Doors are going to vanish. I think there's an old proverb. I think it's a Native American proverb, not sure, but it said, as long as a man's name is spoken, he is not dead.
That's right.
And so I don't want this great art to disappear into the ethers forever because, again, It carries very strong messages, and to me, art saves lives, and it certainly saved mine.
Sure.
But if you look at some American icons who, that were huge, I mean, worldwide, and that are now have slipped to the bottom of the escalator I was referring to earlier, think about guys like Bob Hope or Bing Crosby. Who cares about them today?
Right.
What 14-year-old knows the name Jackie Gleason? And pretty soon it's going to be Groucho Marx, and it's going to be Humphrey Bogart, and it probably already is, Veronica Lake and Hedy Lamarr and Katharine Hepburn. These names are gone. It's over.
Yeah.
My goal is to have the name and the message of Janis Joplin and Grace Slick and Jim Morrison stay alive for centuries.
You're doing God's work as far as I'm concerned, because, I never looked at it in those terms. Even a name like Johnny Carson, who, meant so much to so many. I don't think kids care one way or the other.
Well, you also had, the phrase mass media was invented for a reason, a top 10 primetime hit television show right now will gather 3 to 6 million viewers. And when the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show, he had 76 million viewers. Irving Azoff always has a great quote. He says, there's always 10 songs in the top 10, which is true. But, at what amount of penetration? How many people are listening to those? There was a signal moment. I remember it. I was in the middle of class. I teach at UCLA. And that week, they had just announced the Billboard Top 10. And the number one album in the country was the Dreamgirls soundtrack. And it had sold 66,000 copies.
66,000?
It was number one.
And number one?
Yeah. And I remember a year before that, NSYNC was number one, but they sold 1.2 million in their opening week.
Wow.
So one sold 66,000, one sold 1.2 million, but they're both number one. So what does number one really mean?
Nothing.
I guess it means it's more than number two.
That's it. What's the most absurd offer you've ever been suggested for one of your artists?
Oh my God, that's a very crowded field, Don. I mean, to me, they're all absurd if they don't adhere to the legacy and the art of these great artists. So, you're asking for the hottest place in hell versus the coolest place in hell? I would tell you it's all hell.
It's all hell. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen incense burners and, quote, light my fire, FYRE, unquote, lava lamps and dolls and chewing gum and salad dressing and all kinds of plebeian horrible things.
Speaking about horrible things, tell me about the legal run-in you just had with the Jenner girls.
I mean, I was so incensed about that. They had ostensibly gone out and purchased 100 or 200 vintage T-shirts. At least that was their claim. Maybe they manufactured them. Maybe they bought them vintage. I don't know. They claimed they bought them vintage. And I believe there was Tupac shirts, and I was managing the Tupac Shakur estate at that time, and there were Kurt Cobain shirts, and there were Jim Morrison shirts, and there might have even been Janis Joplin shirts. But they took these vintage, quote-unquote, shirts with this beautiful visage of Jim Morrison, and then they just superimposed their own photo in a dot matrix right over the top of Jim Morrison's photo.
I didn't even know it was that bad. I
mean, you could see Jim Morrison's face behind all the dot matrix of the Jenner face stamped on top of it.
Talk about a place in hell.
And they put them up for sale online at $100 or $200 each, and I saw that, and I went crazy because, the insult.
The arrogance, the ignorance, any other...
There are not enough superlative adjectives to describe.
Yeah. Oh, boy, I hope you sue them into the Ice Age.
Well, we filed a lawsuit. They took them down and apologized, and that's really all you can do, and we moved on.
Yeah,
but that was a particularly egregious example. Thank you for reminding me and ruining my morning all over.
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
It's a perfect example of people who, in the generation that follows them, don't understand exactly what the crime was, probably, because they don't understand just how important the doors were.
Art is important. Art is important, and art saves lives. In any medium, whether it's Lin-Manuel Miranda in theater, or it's Banksy in fine art, or it's, a singer-songwriter or a band. It's all art, and art delivers a message, and art is important, and it changes how we think and feel, and we see the world, hopefully, if it's good art. Some of the latter-day pop culture icons, I know what Jimi Hendrix does. I don't know what Paris Hilton does. I'm not so sure what the Jenner kids do.
They're famous for being famous.
Yeah, as I used to say, they're celebrities who are famous for being well-known.
That's it.
Well, I don't want to trivialize what they do either. I'm sure they've got a very important place in pop culture, and a lot of people follow them and listen to them and adhere to them. And I'm not going to ridicule or minimize that. I'm just going to say it's very different from what I do.
I mean, I can't think of anybody from the 70s, 80s, and backwards that you could say were famous just for being famous.
Oh, there was probably a few, but
maybe
again, Don, what you cannot do.
Yeah.
Don't make the mistake that a lot of people make. One of the cautions that I throw out to my staff all the time is, and I'll repeat it here, which is you and I are not statistically significant samples.
Right.
And one of the biggest mistakes I see is executives who give notes on things or suggestions based on what they like or what hits their gut. But who are you and I? How does a 14-year-old plumber's daughter in Dayton, Ohio think? Certainly much different than you or me.
Right.
And I already have you. You're already a fan. I don't need to convert you. I need to convert her. So if I do stuff that you respect and that's good for you, I may lose her, and I've already got you. So what have I really gained? I've gained nothing.
It's true.
However, as long as I am authentic and credible and true to the original zeitgeist of the artist, then I can turn on the 14-year-old without upsetting you, because I'm still authentic and credible.
And to those ends, you're doing that with things like the Tony-nominated Broadway musical A Night with Janis Joplin, re-exposing her to people that already know her, but also some of the people who might not have. Getting that, like you said, that 13-year-old plumber's daughter to get into it. And that's the medium that they're using right now. They're not necessarily buying albums or the stuff we were doing. It's a whole new world. Right,
which begs the question then and pondering the idea of commercials, because to them that's an authentic medium. It's just not to you or me. But thank you for the kudos.
Yeah.
And that was the idea. Listen, it's also I put things in a different order. I'm kind of backward to most people in the entertainment business in that I look at every opportunity, like a Broadway show or a documentary. I look at them as a legacy exercise first, a marketing exercise second to turn people onto this artist, and then a revenue exercise third.
Yep.
And I think the way most people tend to look at it is revenue first, second, and third.
Exactly.
And they look at ways to, quote, exploit, unquote, this, quote, content, unquote. And those two words are words that I refuse to let be uttered in meetings. I've been known to stop meetings when someone uses one or two of those words. I'll warn them once, but if they do it again, I'll stop the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
We don't use the word exploit. Some of my artists have been exploited their entire lives. Why would I want to further continue to exploit them now?
Sure.
And I don't think Jim Morrison lived and died for content. It's not fucking content. It's art.
Exactly
and,
right.
I don't think you call a girlfriend bitch, and I don't think you call music content, because words have power and they mean things. I'd rather think of us utilizing art than exploiting content. All right, sorry, I'm off my soapbox.
What are the safeguards that, say, a new up-and-coming artist should employ so in the future, should they become a household name and pass away, they can avoid their likeness being misused and exploited?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I'll give you an interesting answer, I hope. One of the things that I've been talking about doing, I've met with many entertainment attorneys and many entertainment business managers and, tax and estate planners. And what I've said to them is, if you take current artists, even successful ones, take an artist like Garth Brooks, you got his estate all planned out, you got his trusts funded, you got his will spelled out, you know exactly who's going to get what and where, you're saving it from probate, but none of you have thought about his legacy. And I guarantee you, I know the first 200 questions that his heirs are going to be asked for which they don't have answers. And when heirs don't have answers, they tend to get very fearful, and that stops progress.
Right.
And so what I've said to them is, put me with Garth Brooks for a week. Let Garth and I sit there for 4 or 5 days, and I'm going to help him write an owner's manual for his legacy, so that when he passes on, that owner's manual can pass to his heirs. And when somebody comes to them and wants to do an incense burner, they can look in their dad's owner's manual, and right there on page 38, oh, okay, here under merchandise ephemera, here's what it says. Or if somebody comes to them with a commercial, that they want to do a commercial, and they're concerned about it, oh, here it is on page 59. Paragraph 2. And that's how you protect and extend the legacy, by really carrying forward the artist's wishes. And if we have the chance to build these owner's manuals before they pass on, I think that would be one of the greatest things we could do.
I love the reissues. Anything else coming out from the Doors, Janis, and Jefferson Airplane?
Yes.
He says enigmatically, leaving me hanging.
Yes, you can look forward to a 50th anniversary edition of Morrison Hotel that's coming.
Great.
And then next year we will have a 50th anniversary deluxe edition of LA Woman. We're doing something special for Pearl next year. And you'll see all kinds of interesting things.
All right, the great Janis Joplin right there. And I want to thank once again Jampole for spending some time with us and really teaching us a lot.